Dr. Sarah Chen never expected her nose would make history. Growing up on Earth's last organic farm in Nebraska, she developed what her colleagues called an unnaturally acute sense of smell. Now, standing in the sterile conference room of Ganymede Station, that gift was about to change humanity's place in the galaxy. The Maersk ambassador's crystalline exoskeleton caught the artificial light, sending rainbow refractions across the metal walls. Its translator hummed softly as it addressed the assembled diplomatic corps. We regret that despite our most advanced scanning technology, we cannot detect any chemical signatures from the Anxifol delegation. Without verification of their pheromone patterns, we cannot proceed with the trade negotiations. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She'd been catching whiffs of something strange ever since the Anxifol arrived, a complex bouquet that reminded her of autumn leaves and ozone. Initially, she dismissed it as station recycling artifacts, but now, "Excuse me, Ambassador," she said, standing slowly. All 6 of the Maersk's sensory stalks swiveled toward her. "I believe I might be able to help." The human delegation head, Ambassador Rodriguez, shot her a warning look. This was supposed to be a simple observation rotation for her xenobiology studies, but Sarah couldn't stay silent, not when she might have the solution. "The Anxifol are definitely producing chemical signatures," she continued. "They smell like the moment before a thunderstorm, mixed with decomposing maple leaves." The room erupted in a cascade of translator chatter. The Anxifol delegation, previously motionless in their environment suits, began to undulate in what Sarah would later learn was extreme surprise. The lead Anxifol stepped forward, its suit rippling. "Impossible. Our chemical emissions are specifically engineered to be undetectable to all known sensor technologies. How can a human biological system perceive them?" Sarah swallowed hard, aware that she was now the center of attention for 3 species worth of diplomatic personnel. Human olfactory capabilities are unique. We evolved as persistence hunters, tracking prey through scent trails. Our noses can detect certain compounds in parts per trillion. Ambassador Rodriguez had moved to stand beside her. "Dr. Chen, are you certain about this?" "Absolutely. And there's more." Sarah turned to face the Anxifol directly. "Your chemical signatures have changed subtly throughout the meeting. There was a sharp spike when the Maersk mentioned the trading rights for the Kuiper Belt mining operations. The Anxifol suit rippled more violently. This is unprecedented. Our species has relied on chemical invisibility for diplomatic advantage for 15 centuries. No technology has ever." "This isn't technology," Sarah interrupted, then caught herself. "I apologize for the interruption, but that's the point. This is biology. Millions of years of evolution creating a natural system more sensitive than artificial sensors." The Maersk ambassador's crystalline form chimed softly, their equivalent of thoughtful humming. "If what you say is true, human, this changes everything. Our inability to read Anxifol chemical signatures has been the primary barrier to meaningful cooperation between our species." Sarah nodded, her heart racing. "I can document the changes in their chemical signatures throughout negotiations, create a baseline for comparison, maybe even help develop new sensors calibrated to human olfactory capabilities." The next few hours were a blur of technical discussions, chemical analysis, and diplomatic breakthroughs. Sarah found herself acting as a living translator, describing subtle shifts in the Anxifol's chemical emissions that corresponded to everything from agreement to anxiety to deception. By the time the session ended, 3 major trade agreements had been signed, and humanity had secured its first major role in galactic diplomacy. As the delegations filed out, Ambassador Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside. "Dr. Chen, I don't know whether to reprimand you for diplomatic overreach or recommend you for a Nobel Prize." He shook his head, smiling. "I don't think you realize what you've done today. The Maersk-Anxifol trade negotiations have been deadlocked for decades. You just broke that deadlock with your nose." Sarah laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "All those years my parents insisted I take over the farm, I guess working in the soil gave me more than just dirty hands. The Mursk ambassador approached, crystal facets gleaming. Dr. Chen, my government would like to formally request human olfactory experts for all future diplomatic interactions with the Angstal. We would, of course, provide significant compensation and technological exchange. Sarah glanced at Rodriguez, who nodded slightly. I would be honored, Ambassador. Though I should warn you, not all humans have equally sensitive noses. We'll need to test and train a specialized diplomatic course. Of course, the ambassador chimed. We anticipated this. We are prepared to fund a full training program under your leadership. Its sensory stalks wavered, and what Sarah had learned was their expression of amusement. It seems humanity's primitive biological systems have their advantages after all. As Sarah left the conference room, she caught one last whiff of the Anxithal's chemical signature, now tinged with what she interpreted as respect. Humanity had just proven that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best ones, and that evolution's gifts could outperform the most advanced technology. She smiled, thinking of her family's farm back on Earth. Who would have thought that growing up surrounded by natural smells instead of sterile station air would lead to this? Sometimes the universe had a sense of humor. And today, it smelled like victory. 3 months after the historic breakthrough in human-alien relations, Dr. Sarah Chen found herself permanently stationed aboard the massive Ganymede diplomatic hub. Her small office, nestled between the Mursk crystalline chambers and the Ankesthal atmospheric habitats, had become the unofficial center of a new form of interspecies communication. Today, something was wrong. Sarah paused in the middle of analyzing a particularly complex Ankesthal emotional signature, her nostrils flaring slightly. There was a new smell in the station's carefully regulated atmosphere, something acrid and metallic that reminded her of corroding copper. Computer, run atmospheric analysis, she commanded, already knowing what the response would be. All parameters within normal range. No anomalies detected. Sarah frowned, setting aside her work. The smell was getting stronger, carrying undertones that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It reminded her of something from her childhood. The time lightning had struck their barn's ancient electrical system, filling the air with the scent of burning wires moments before the fire started. She tapped her comm unit. Chen to engineering. Are you doing any electrical maintenance in Section 7? Negative, Dr. Chen. All systems are operating normally. Is there a problem? The smell was definitely stronger now. Sarah's head was starting to ache. Another bad sign. I'm not sure yet, but I think we should. Her words were cut off by a sudden flicker of the lights. For a moment, the artificial gravity wavered, creating a sickening lurch in her stomach. Then everything stabilized, but the acrid smell had intensified. Sarah was already moving, her feet carrying her toward the Mursk section. She'd learned to trust her nose over the years, and right now it was screaming danger. The crystalline aliens were particularly vulnerable to electrical disruptions. Their silicon-based biology could be shattered by sudden power surges. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Ambassador Crix, their crystalline form vibrating with what she recognized as agitation. Dr. Chen, our sensors detect nothing, but something feels wrong. The vibrations through the station's structure have changed. I smell it too, Sarah confirmed, tapping rapidly on her comm unit. Ambassador Rodriguez, we have a situation. I need immediate evacuation of the Mursk quarters and a full shutdown of power systems in Section 7. There was a pause before Rodriguez's voice came through, tense but controlled. That's a major action, Dr. Chen. What evidence are you basing this on? Another power fluctuation rippled through the station. This time, Sarah caught a new scent, the unmistakable odor of overheating plastics. Sir, remember Ganymede's charter after the diplomatic breakthrough. Human olfactory warnings are to be treated as Level 1 sensors. And right now, my nose is telling me we're about to have a catastrophic power surge. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity but was probably only seconds. Then, Evacuation order confirmed. All personnel in Section 7 proceed immediately to emergency shelters. Engineering, initiate power shutdown protocols. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. Sarah helped guide the Maersk delegation to the reinforced shelters, her nose tracking the spreading electrical problem through the station's walls. The smell was evolving, taking on new and worrying characteristics that suggested the problem was more than a simple malfunction. Just as the last crystalline diplomat was secured, the power grid in Section 7 went into terminal cascade. Even through the shelter's thick walls, Sarah could hear the pop and crackle of dying systems. If the Maersk had still been in their quarters. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Rodriguez's voice was grave through the comm. Preliminary analysis suggests this wasn't an accident. We're finding evidence of systematic tampering with the power distribution nodes. If you hadn't. Sir, Sarah interrupted, that copper-tinged smell still tickling her nose. I don't think this is over. The scent, it's changing, spreading. Whatever's causing this is still active. She could almost hear Rodriguez weighing options through the calm silence. Finally, I'm calling a full station emergency council. Dr. Chen, I need you there. Your nose just saved the Maersk delegation. Let's see what else it can tell us. As Sarah made her way to the emergency council chamber, she caught fragments of conversation from passing crew members. Word was spreading about how a human sense of smell had detected what advanced alien sensors had missed. But Sarah wasn't thinking about diplomatic implications anymore. That corroding copper smell was still there, transforming into something new and even more worrying. Someone had tried to assassinate an entire alien delegation, using methods specifically designed to bypass advanced detection systems. They hadn't counted on humanity's primitive biological sensors. But Sarah's nose was telling her this was just the beginning. And somewhere on this station, their enemy was preparing for the next attack. The question was, would they be able to stop it in time? The emergency council chamber was chaos when Sarah arrived. Representatives from 12 species argued in a cacophony of translated voices, their various environmental suits and biological adaptations creating a dizzying array of movement around the circular table. But Sarah barely noticed the visual spectacle. She was focused on the evolving tapestry of scents that told a far more worrying story. The copper smell is stronger here, she announced, cutting through the noise. And it's changed. There are new elements, something almost sweet, but wrong. Like artificial sweetener that started to break down. Ambassador Rodriguez gestured for silence, and the chamber gradually quieted. Dr. Chen's olfactory warnings have already prevented one attack. I suggest we all listen carefully to what she has to say. The HFY representative's environment suit rippled. Our own chemical signatures are being affected by something in the station's atmosphere. Something that shouldn't be possible given our filtration systems. Sarah's nose twitched as she caught another whiff of that wrong sweet smell. Whatever it is, it's not just in the air anymore. It's reacting with materials in the station itself. The metal, the plastics, maybe even. She stopped, a horrible realization dawning. Ambassador, we need to seal this chamber immediately. And I mean completely full quarantine protocols. Explain, Rodriguez demanded, but he was already reaching for the emergency controls. The smell, it's not just chemical contamination. It's changing too fast, too purposefully. This is a weapon, and it's adaptive. Every time it encounters a new material or environment, it modifies itself. Sarah turned to the HFY delegation. That's why you can sense it now. It's learned to bypass your chemical shielding by becoming something entirely new. The chamber's heavy security doors slid shut with a hiss just as the lights flickered again. This time, Sarah caught a new scent, sharp and clinical, like a hospital's disinfectant gone horribly wrong. They're using our own technology against us, the Maersk ambassador chimed, crystal structure vibrating with distress. The power grid attack was merely to disguise the introduction of this agent into our systems. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. The electrical damage would have created the perfect cover. Burning smells to mask the weapon's initial deployment, systems too damaged to detect the subtle changes. She paused, taking another careful breath. But they didn't count on human noses. We can detect the individual components as they transform. The Neanderthal representative moved closer, its suit's sensors extended. Can you identify the base compounds? Our analysis systems are detecting nothing coherent. Sarah closed her eyes, focusing entirely on her sense of smell. Years of training on the farm, learning to identify every subtle change in soil composition and plant health, had prepared her for this moment. The foundation is nanoscale, tiny machines, but with a chemical delivery system. The copper smell is from the mechanical components breaking down. The sweetness, that's the delivery mechanism. Some kind of sophisticated sugar analog designed to penetrate cellular membranes. The chamber erupted in new chaos as the implications sank in. A weapon that could bypass every known defense system, adapt to its targets, and deliver its payload at the cellular level. It was a violation of every arms treaty in galactic law. "We need to evacuate the station," one of the council members declared. "Send out a general distress call." "No," Sarah said firmly, her nose catching yet another change in the weapon's scent profile. "We can't risk this spreading beyond Ganymede. And evacuation would be exactly what they want. Everyone running to their ships, carrying the agent with them, spreading it across the galaxy." She turned to Rodriguez. "Sir, I think I know who's behind this." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "How could you possibly?" "Because I can smell them," Sarah said grimly. "Under all the weapons' chemical signatures, there's another scent. Remember how I said I could detect Neanderthal chemical emissions? Well, these are similar, but wrong. Artificial, like someone tried to copy Neanderthal biochemistry, but couldn't quite get it right." The Neanderthal representative's suit rippled violently. "The separatists. They've been trying to replicate our biological achievements through technological means for decades." Sarah nodded. "They created this weapon specifically to target the station's mixed population. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed their artificial version of Neanderthal chemical signatures would be as undetectable as the real thing." "That's all very interesting," Rodriguez cut in. "But how does it help us stop this attack?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Because now that I know what we're dealing with, I can tell you exactly how the weapon is spreading through the station. And more importantly," she took another careful breath, analyzing the complex mix of scents, "I think I know how to stop it." The assembled ambassadors leaned forward as Sarah began to explain her plan. Outside the sealed chamber, the weapon continued its invisible spread through Ganymede Station. But for the first time since this crisis began, they had hope. All thanks to a human nose that could do what no advanced alien sensor could manage. The question was whether they could implement Sarah's solution before the weapon completed its final transformation. Because that artificial sweetness in the air was getting stronger, and Sarah had a terrible feeling about what would happen when it reached its peak. Sarah stood before the emergency council, her hand steady as she manipulated the holographic display showing Ganymede Station's environmental systems. The artificial sweetness in the air had grown stronger in the past hour, carrying undertones that made her increasingly certain they were running out of time. "The weapon is using the station's recycling system to propagate," she explained, highlighting the relevant sections. "But it's not just passive distribution. The nanomechanes are actually learning from each environmental system they encounter, adapting their chemical delivery method to be more efficient." "Fascinating," the Mursk ambassador chimed, "their crystalline form refracting emergency lighting. But how does this help us neutralize the threat?" Sarah took a careful breath, analyzing the latest changes in the weapon's scent. "Because it's not just learning, it's evolving. And like any evolutionary process, it leaves behind traces of its previous forms. I can smell them breaking down in the ventilation system." "With all due respect, Dr. Chen," one of the station's senior engineers interrupted, "we can't base our response on human olfactory impressions alone. Our sensor arrays." "Your sensor arrays are worse than useless right now," Sarah cut in, surprising herself with her vehemence. They're actively misleading you because they're designed to look for known threats. This weapon was engineered specifically to exploit that limitation. The engineer bristled. And you suggest we trust human biology over centuries of technological advancement? Yes, Sarah said simply. Because right now my nose is telling me we have maybe 30 minutes before the weapon reaches its final stage. I can smell the precursor chemicals building up, something like ozone mixed with decay. When those components reach critical concentration, I suspect we'll see the weapon's true purpose. Ambassador Rodriguez raised a hand for silence as the chamber erupted in argument. Dr. Chen, you said you had a plan. Let's hear it. Sarah nodded, adjusting the holographic display. The weapon is adaptive, but it's not perfect. Every time it evolves to overcome a new barrier, it becomes more complex and more unstable. Those breakdown products I'm detecting, they're not just traces, they're failures. She highlighted the station's enormous water recycling tanks. We can use that instability against it. Every complex chemical process has a rate-limiting step, a bottleneck that determines how fast it can proceed. Find that bottleneck, and you can control the whole reaction. And you believe you've identified this bottleneck. The HFY representative's suit rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as intense interest. Yes, the artificial sweetener smell. It's not just a delivery mechanism, it's a stabilizer. The weapon needs it to maintain coherence during evolution. Without it, she allowed herself a small smile. Without it, the whole system should collapse. The engineer scoffed. Should. You want us to bet the station's survival on a hypothesis you can't even verify with instruments. Sometimes the most sophisticated sensor is the one nature spent millions of years perfecting. Sarah countered. She turned to Rodriguez. Sir, I need authorization to access the environmental control systems. And I need it now. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Do it. But Dr. Chen, if you're wrong, I'm not wrong. Sarah was already moving to the environmental controls. The weapons designers made the same mistake everyone else did. They assumed their artificial systems could perfectly replicate natural ones. But there's a reason evolution took millions of years to develop stable chemical signatures. You can't rush that process without introducing fatal flaws. Her fingers flew over the controls as she explained her plan. We're going to introduce a modified version of the station's water purification catalyst into the recycling system. It's designed to break down complex organic compounds, including artificial sweeteners. When it hits the weapon's stabilizer component, the whole system collapses. The HFY representative finished. Elegant. But the concentration would have to be precise. Too little would be ineffective. Too much could damage the station's legitimate recycling functions. Sarah's nose twitched as another wave of that wrong sweet smell washed through the chamber. That's where I come in. I can smell the concentration gradients, guide the catalyst to where it's needed most. The next 20 minutes were a blur of careful adjustments and constant monitoring. Sarah felt as if her world had narrowed to nothing but scent, the weapon's evolving signature, the sharp, clean smell of the catalyst, the complex interactions between them. She guided the catalyst through the station's systems like a conductor leading an orchestra, using nothing but her nose and instinct refined by years of experience. The first sign that it was working came when the artificial sweetness began to fade, replaced by a sharp chemical tang that reminded Sarah of vinegar. Then, gradually, other scents started to disappear. First, the copper smell, then the ozone. Finally, even the subtle wrongness that had permeated everything. Chemical sensors detecting massive breakdown of unknown compounds in environmental systems, the engineer reported, surprise evident in their voice. Whatever you did, Dr. Chen, it's working. Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly, but she kept her attention focused on the scents around her. It's not over yet. We need to maintain the catalyst flow until... there. She caught it, the final shift in the air that told her the weapon had been fully neutralized. The station's atmosphere was returning to its normal, carefully maintained blend of recycled components. But as the emergency council erupted in relieved celebration, Sarah frowned. Under the fading weapon signatures and sharp catalyst smell, she caught something else, something that reminded her of scorched metal and artificial lightning. The Separatists' weapon was defeated, but Sarah's nose was telling her their troubles weren't over yet. The question was, would anyone believe her warnings a second time? The celebration in the emergency council chamber lasted exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds before Sarah's voice cut through the noise. "Ambassador, we need to lock down the station's computer core. Now." Rodriguez turned to her, his expression shifting from relief to concern. "What are you sensing?" "Ozone and hot silicon," Sarah replied, her nostrils flaring. "But wrong. Artificial, like the fake HFY signatures. And it's coming from the direction of the main computer banks." The engineer who had doubted her earlier was already checking his systems. No anomalies detected in the computer core. All systems are. He stopped as every display in the chamber suddenly flickered. "That's impossible. We're completely isolated from the main network." "Not impossible," Sarah said grimly. "Inevitable." The chemical weapon wasn't their primary attack. It was a distraction. Something to keep us focused on the environmental systems while they infiltrated our computers. The HFY representative's suit rippled with agitation. "The Separatists are known for their cyber warfare capabilities. But our firewalls are based on the same principles as your chemical defenses," Sarah finished. "They're looking for known attack patterns, not fundamental changes in the system's behavior. But some things can't be hidden." She tapped her nose. Like the smell of overheating quantum processors, Rodriguez was already moving. "Security team to the computer core. Full lockdown protocols." He turned to Sarah. "What else can you tell us?" Sarah closed her eyes, focusing entirely on her sense of smell. The station's recycled air was a complex tapestry of information for those who knew how to read it. "The heat signature is building. They're using our own processing power against us, forcing the systems to run complex calculations that generate excess heat. But there's something else." Her eyes snapped open. "They're trying to overload the core. The heat buildup isn't just a side effect. It's the goal. If those processors reach critical temperature, the cooling systems will fail," the engineer finished, face pale. "The resulting cascade would destroy the station's central nervous system. We'd lose life support, gravity control, everything." "How long?" Rodriguez demanded. Sarah took another careful breath. "Based on the intensity of the ozone smell, 15 minutes, maybe less. They must have planted this attack before we even detected the chemical weapon." The chamber erupted in frantic activity. The engineer was frantically trying to regain control of the cooling systems. The Maersk representative was coordinating evacuation protocols. The HFY were attempting to trace the attack's origin. But Sarah remained still, her mind racing back to her childhood farm, to long summer days spent fixing ancient equipment, learning to diagnose problems by smell and sound because they couldn't afford modern diagnostic tools. There was something. "The processors," she said suddenly. "They smell like our old tractor did just before harvest season." Rodriguez looked at her blankly. "Dr. Chen, I fail to see." "No, this is important," Sarah insisted. "Every summer, the tractor would overheat because dust from the fields would clog its cooling fins. We couldn't afford new filters, so we had to get creative. We used—" She turned to the engineer. "What's the coolant composition in the computer core?" "Standard mix. Hydrogen-based with organic stabilizers," he replied. "But the Separatists have locked us out of the cooling controls." "We don't need the controls," Sarah said, already moving toward the chamber's emergency supplies. "We just need to change the coolant's behavior." She pulled out a small canister of emergency sealant foam. "The stabilizers in your coolant, they're carbon-based, right?" Understanding dawned on the engineer's face. "Yes, but that's brilliant. The foam's metallic components would react with the stabilizers, temporarily increasing the coolant's heat capacity. buying us enough time to fight off the cyber attack. Sarah finished. But we'll have to introduce it manually. The maintenance access tunnels are too hot, the engineer protested. The temperature in there must be approaching 60 degrees Celsius. Sarah was already removing her outer jacket. Good thing I grew up in Nebraska. Summers in the grain silos were hotter than that. She grabbed the sealant canister. I'll need a maintenance kit and directions to the nearest access point. The next 10 minutes were a blur of heat and confined spaces. Sarah crawled through maintenance tunnels, following her nose as much as the engineer's directions. The smell of overheating electronics grew stronger with each meter, until she finally reached the central cooling distribution node. Her hands shook slightly as she prepared the sealant foam, but her movements were sure. Years of maintaining farm equipment in less than ideal conditions had taught her the value of improvisation. The foam hissed as it entered the coolant stream, and for a moment, Sarah feared they had miscalculated. Then she caught it. A subtle shift in the hot electronic smell, a slight lessening of the ozone tang. In the command chamber, the engineer's voice crackled over her comm. Temperature dropping in the primary core. Whatever you did, it's working. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she began the cramped journey back. By the time she reached the chamber, the crisis was nearly over. The extra time provided by the coolant modification had allowed the security team to isolate and eliminate the cyber attack. The aftermath brought changes no one had expected. The Separatists' attack, meant to destroy the station and destabilize interstellar relations, had instead strengthened them. Sarah found herself at the center of a new initiative, one that would combine human sensory capabilities with alien technology in ways neither side had imagined possible. It's not just about smelling things, she explained to the council at the formal hearing a week later. It's about recognizing that sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. Evolution spent millions of years perfecting our senses, creating detection systems more sophisticated than any artificial sensor. The Maersk ambassador's crystalline form chimed in agreement. Perhaps we have been too quick to dismiss biological systems in favor of technological ones. There is wisdom in what nature has crafted. Sarah nodded, thinking of her family's farm, still producing food the old way back on Earth. The best solutions often combine both approaches. Technology can enhance our natural capabilities, but it shouldn't replace them entirely. As she left the chamber that day, Sarah caught a new scent in the station's air. Under the usual recycled atmosphere, there was something else, the sharp, clean smell of new beginnings. Humanity had proven its worth not through advanced technology or overwhelming force, but through the gifts that evolution had granted them millions of years ago. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the nose really does know best.